Thank you so much for joining us for this first of 3 early care and education resource showcases that we at Nemours Children's Health are hosting this summer. We are really thrilled to share some new resources that we've been working on over the last year, and we hope that you'll help us spread the word to anyone that might be interested in exploring how they can use these materials. I am Kalisti Chong, a manager at Nemours Children's National Office of Policy and Prevention, and I work with our early care and education team that focuses on creating healthy early care and education policies, practices, environments, both at the state systems level and the facility level, working with states across the nation. We'd also love for you to introduce yourself in the chat as well. We'd love for you to share where you're located and the organization and the agency that you work with. So during today's presentation, feel free to utilize the chat box and share any thoughts or questions that you might have there. We'll do our very best to address all of the questions throughout the presentation, and then at the end, we'll have some time for questions as well. And then the recording of today's session will be posted on our healthykidshealthyfuture.org website. We'll also send out an email of the recording later this week, along with a recording of this presentation presented in Spanish. Of course, our today's showcase is focused on the Better Together Family Cafés, and we are officially sharing the Spanish version of these materials. We are always looking for opportunities to expand the resources that we have available and to reach as many populations as possible. So we're super excited to have had the opportunity to translate the Family Cafés to Spanish, and we're curious to see how these resources are used to support Spanish-speaking families. So let's jump into today's session. So our agenda for today includes a little bit of background and information about how we develop the Better Together Family Cafés. I'll share a bit about overall what the resources are. We'll be sharing the resources that are actually available in both English and Spanish. My colleague Hannah Press is going to be showing us all how to access these materials. And then we have Deborah Blackburn from our fabulous partnering organization in Arkansas, Curricula Concepts. She's going to be joining us today to talk about how to host a family cafe and some considerations for how to host cafes, especially in other languages such as Spanish. And then we're going to have time for questions at the end. So I'd like to start off by just sharing a little bit of background information on Better Together. So it was a 3-year project that started in 2019 and was implemented in 4 states: Arizona, Arkansas, Indiana, and Mississippi. There were several components to the project, including the Better Together Learning Collaboratives for early care and education programs. And these learning collaboratives were focused on several different nutrition and physical activity topics. So through Better Together, we developed an innovation project to enhance the Better Together model to promote positive experience-based approaches and practices in early care and education settings, and then also to strengthen the program and the family relationship around nutrition and physical activity topics. And we decided to use the Family Cafe model. We also hear often requests from ECE programs for more family engagement curriculum, family engagement materials, and educational resources. And this approach is really a great one that we can use to partner with families around early care and education, child health and wellness type topics. We work together with several partners to develop the Family Cafés. First of all, we have Curricula Concepts. So Nemours contracted with Curricula Concepts as the lead for this part of the Better Together project, and their staff developed and piloted the Family Cafés. We also partner with the HOPE National Resource Center at Tufts Medical Center, and HOPE stands for Healthy Outcomes for Positive Experiences, and the Tufts HOPE team helped to incorporate a focus on positive experiences into the framework of the Family Cafés, as well as the learning collaboratives that were implemented in Arkansas. They spent time training the team on the HOPE building blocks, and they provided a lot of feedback on the materials that Curricula Concepts developed. We also partnered with the Go Knapsack team at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They led the evaluation of the pilot, and they provided a lot of feedback on those resources as they were being developed as well. So the Family Cafés were initially piloted from 2021 to 2022, and ECE programs that were participating in the Better Together Learning Collaboratives in Arkansas, they were recruited to take part in this pilot to help better engage their families. So as the ECE programs were participating in the learning collaboratives, the program staff were learning all about nutrition and physical activity topics. They were making all of these great changes at the program level, And then through the family cafes, they were able to also engage families in these conversations about the same topics to help impact healthy changes at home as well. We found that combining the family cafe model with sharing this type of content on nutrition and physical activity topics was really a great way for programs to share information and to facilitate meaningful conversations with families. And I truly feel like it's so powerful when childcare programs and families are on the same page about nurturing healthy growth and development of children. I think that it really helps to impact children in a really great way when you're impacting multiple systems in their lives. And then in early 2023, we hosted a resource showcase to release the package of Better Together Family Cafe materials in English that ECE programs or any professionals working with families can utilize for free. In late 2023, Curricula Concepts asked if we could translate these materials to Spanish, and we were super grateful that our leadership was committed to this and were able to make it happen. So we've been working since the beginning of this year to have the materials translated and to be able to share them with you today. To share what a family cafe is and how it can be used as a tool to encourage these types of conversations with families around health and wellness topics, we worked with an animator to develop a short video. And this video can also be used by project coordinators or cafe facilitators to recruit participants for the family cafe sessions, or it could even be shared with community partners that might be interested in using the family cafe materials. At this time, we don't have the video in Spanish. Maybe in the future we will, but you can utilize the closed caption and translation features in YouTube to offer captions in Spanish. And Hannah's going to play that for us.
When it comes to our children's health and wellness, connection matters. Meaningful conversations within a caring community can provide families with tools and support to help them nurture their children's healthy growth and development. Whether online or in person, family cafes create opportunities for families to get to know their childcare providers, community partners, healthcare resources, and each other. In a safe and friendly setting, families explore a variety of topics to increase their understanding of the health and wellness needs of young children. Families access information on local services and resources that might be helpful to them. Cafes bring families together to celebrate milestones and successes, increasing motivation to continue on the journey towards health. Creating a welcoming and distraction-free environment during cafes makes it possible for families to fully engage in conversation. Families also develop a sense of belonging and social connection through sharing their experiences and encouraging one another. Family cafes, connecting families and communities to create the healthiest generation of children. To learn more about family cafes and other nutrition and physical activity resources, visit healthykidshealthyfuture.org. When it comes to our children,
Awesome. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. And if you all want to use the video, feel free to use that as well with sharing and promoting the cafes. So as we just saw in the short video, the purpose of the Better Together Family Cafes is really to engage families and caregivers of young children in meaningful and intentional conversations around nutrition and physical activity. ECE programs can utilize these materials themselves to engage with families, and also any community organization can implement the cafes both in partnership with an early care and education program to engage families, or the materials can be used by organizations to support families in an area independently without partnering with a childcare program. The cafes help to bridge the gap between families and ECE programs to create a community of support. And the cafes facilitate connections between the families, the childcare programs, and community organizations. We know that ECE program relationships with families throughout the pandemic were, of course, really challenged, and communication was extremely difficult. And we see the cafes as a great approach for early care and education programs to re-engage with families during this time, whenever we're able to. So through Better Together, 5 cafe sessions were developed by Curricula Concepts. The topics of these sessions include, and they're listed at the top of the screen there, building hope and resilience together. So this is an introductory session to introduce the hope building blocks and positive experiences framework that I mentioned that we work with Tufts Hope National Resource Center to incorporate into the family cafes. And we provided this session to participating ECE program staff to help them better understand the project and the cafes, but it can also be used with families as well. We also have a session on physical activity called Active Families, Active Children, a session on nutrition called Cooking Up Healthy Lifestyles. On family style dining, the session is called Creating Memories at Mealtime. And then we had a highly requested session on screen time that we named Managing Screen Time in a Technology World. The Better Together Family Cafes align with the traditional World Cafe approach to leading conversations with families. You basically have a cafe facilitator that's responsible for organizing and leading the cafe. And this includes really working to create an open and welcoming environment where families feel comfortable sharing. And then you have the table hosts that are responsible for guiding the small group conversations. So the whole approach aims to encourage everyone's contributions to the discussions and to help participants know that their ideas and their thoughts matter and are truly valued. And each cafe takes around 90 minutes to deliver as is, and they can be implemented either in person or virtually. The structure for each of the cafe sessions is very similar across all 5 of them. They include time for introductions. They include an overview of the Hope building blocks. They include an introduction to some of the topic-specific content, and then a series of facilitated discussions on the cafe topics where the participants break into those smaller groups to have more intimate conversations about the topics, about their experiences, and about things that they would like to try in their own families. And then at the end, there's a time for participants to reflect on what they've learned throughout the cafe and to have a traditional harvest, which is a time where participants are encouraged to share their ideas and share their thoughts with the larger group once everyone has come back together. And then there's also activity at the end of each session where participants basically write themselves a letter that will be delivered to them at a later date to help them remember what they learned during the cafe and any commitments that they made to themselves to try something new at home. And then we have the integration of the Hope building blocks. So I'm not going to go in depth because of time about this right now, but if you want to learn more about the Hope building blocks and the Hope National Resource Center, which is an incredible approach, you can visit positiveexperience.org. That's listed there on the screen. And so I thought before we jump into the actual resources that are available, I thought we'd share some of the really promising outcomes of the Family Cafe pilot that we did in 2021 and 2022. So we ended up, out of all the programs in Arkansas that participated in the learning collaboratives, we ended up having 33 ECE programs that opted into participating in the family cafes that were offered. There were 52 sessions that were offered by our trainers in Arkansas. The participants were primarily family members at 50% of families of the children that were attending the childcare programs. There were 34% that were staff at those childcare programs. And then 16% of the participants were staff at the programs that actually had children that attended those programs as well. As you can see, majority of these were also hosted virtually at 95% of them. And then of all of the evaluations that were completed, and we had quite a few, participants strongly agreed about many of the things that we were asking them about. So 86% strongly agreed that they enjoyed the cafe, 89% strongly agreed that the information was useful, and so on. You can see on the screen. And then the average net promoter score was at 82, which means that a majority of the participants would actually be willing to promote the cafes to other families, which I think is a huge testament of the type of work that we put into this, but then also the experience that the families had whenever they participated in the cafes. And then participants rated the opportunities to connect with others as most useful. And of course, we implemented these during COVID. That's why we had so many of them that were implemented virtually. And it was just a really great time to be able to help those families to better to connect with one another. Many of the families had never met one another before. Many of the families only see their childcare providers at drop off and pick up every single day. So it's a really great opportunity to help them to connect and to speak with one another face to face. And then there are a couple of quotes I wanted to share with you all about the experiences that the families had with the family cafes. the one that I feel like is so relevant to all of us is the one at the top. It just really reinforced to me that I need to be more aware of spending too much time on my phone or distracted and try to refocus on spending time with my kids while they're still young. I know that's very relevant to myself as well. All right, so let's walk through the resources that are available to guide the planning and implementation of the Better Together Family Cafe sessions. All of these resources are available in English and in Spanish. And who can use the materials, if you're wondering? Anyone working with families can use these materials for free. This includes early care and education programs, trainers and coaches, home visiting programs, Head Start family engagement specialists, anyone that really wants to engage families in discussions around nutrition and physical activity topics. So first off, we have the Family Cafes Toolkit, and this document is around 20 pages long. It's divided in two sections, a planning and implementation sections. In this document, we tried to offer as many ideas and factors for you to consider as we could think of, but we understand that each facilitator and coordinator's reality and resources are different. So we presented factors for consideration, knowing that every facilitator is going to have to go in and adjust and modify the plan to incorporate their available resources that they have, and then also to meet the needs of their audience. And I just wanted to note that all of these materials are adaptable and flexible, and we strive to ensure that those we work with and support feel valued and seen. And we encourage anyone that uses these materials, either the English or the Spanish version, to modify the content to be as relevant as possible, including, especially including real life examples. And Deborah with Curricula Concepts will share several other ideas for hosting cafes later in this presentation. And then this toolkit contains checklists at the end of each one of the sections as a reminders of factors to consider. So there's a planning checklist, screenshots of the English and the Spanish version. And then there's the implementation checklist. So things just to really consider and think about, reminders. Each Family Cafe session has a PowerPoint that walks the facilitator through each step of hosting the cafe. It provides detailed notes on the content to be shared and questions that each table host is going to use to facilitate the conversations on the topics. And like I mentioned before, we are glad for each facilitator to modify these presentations to make them as relevant as possible to the families they're working with. And then lastly, Curricula Concepts developed some really great handouts that can be shared with participants. They can be shared virtually or printed for in-person. And each handout has relevant resources that families can check out to gain more information about the topic. There are links and also QR codes, as you can see, that a participant can use. And unfortunately, I wanted to mention that not all of these resources are available in Spanish, but we encourage partnering organizations and participants to utilize the incredible online tools that can help to translate web pages to Spanish, such as Google Chrome's translation feature. And I know that all the other web pages also have those types of features as well. So those are the materials that we have available. And now I'd like to introduce my wonderful colleague, Hannah Press. Hannah is a senior program and policy analyst with Nemours Children's National Office, and she's going to share with you about how to access these materials. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Caliste, for sharing the overview of the materials. I'm going to quickly highlight how you can access these awesome free materials. So the first way you can do it, Caliste highlighted the Family Cafe Toolkit. This is a screenshot of what would be the second page of that about 20-page document. And all of the resources that we talked about, the PowerPoints, the handouts, are all directly linked here in the toolkit. So this is a screenshot, but they're all linked. So if you have that one toolkit, you can access all of the other materials that are downloadable from Basecamp. Now, the other way to access the materials is through the Healthy Kids, Healthy Future website. So from the homepage, you'll be able to navigate to the trainer page and then the Better Together page. As you can see here on the third tab, it says the Better Together Family Cafes. There is a form on the right where you'll share a little bit of information about yourself. And when you complete that form, you're going to get this fun little blue button that says materials. And when you click on that, you are going to have these accordions with all of the materials underneath them. What's great is you can see a little bit of a screenshot. If you look at the administrative resources when you open that accordion, all of the materials, there are going to be links directly to the English and the Spanish. There are a couple of materials that we were not able to translate, but I would say that the majority of the resources are in both English and Spanish. So I will be dropping the specific link to be able to access these resources. Oh, I see Calisti just dropped that in the chat. So you can access all of those straight from the Healthy Kids, Healthy Future website. So I am so excited to be able to introduce Deborah Blackburn, who is the Executive Director at Curricula Concepts. As Khaleesi mentioned, Curricula Concepts helps develop these materials and pilot them in Arkansas, and Curricula Concepts does a lot of work around family engagement. So I'm going to turn it over to Deborah to talk about some considerations for hosting cafes in Spanish, as well as some experiences from Arkansas. So go ahead, Deborah.
All right, thank you so much, Hannah. So just a little bit about Curricula Concepts. We at Curricula Concepts have two main focuses. We are all about family engagement and connecting families with uh, early education programs and where their children are in care, and we're also about health and wellness. So these Better Together cafes were a perfect merger of both of our focuses, and we are forever grateful that Nemours and Tufts gave us the opportunity to help write those and pilot those, and then also translate them into Spanish to continue to serve providers and families in Arkansas and across the nation. So we've been doing cafes in general for several years, probably pretty close to a decade now. And I'm so excited to be able to share just a few things that we have picked up on the way in general. Anytime you're doing a cafe, just some lessons learned and things, like I said, we've discovered along the way to make cafes successful. One of the first things is setting the mood for a cafe, and we want cafes to be like, we always say, like, we want them to be like conversations with friends, just like if you're sitting at a nice little restaurant, a little bistro, a little cafe, and having conversations with friends. That's the kind of mood that we want to generate in a cafe. We also understand, though, I think I've done a cafe in about every kind or type of building imaginable, and you adjust and modify as best you can. But one of the things that we have discovered that works very well is, when possible, take advantage of natural lighting. Obviously, that can't happen all the time. I've done it in rooms that have no exterior walls, no access to natural lighting, or it's nighttime and there's no access to natural lighting. But I have done it at times when we're able to turn off all of those fluorescent lights and just have, there's this one in particular that's popping into my head, the golden light of afternoon come in, and we didn't have to have any lights on. It was so nice and bright and sunny and warm, and it just sets a different tone. So when possible, take advantage of that. Some other ways that you can set the mood are decorations. And I, especially since the pandemic, I keep my decorations very simple. The less that I have to clean and sanitize, the better, but I want everything to be washable and sanitizable, whether it's COVID or the flu season, whatever it is. But also keeping in mind that we want them to be very gender neutral. We want to be sure that the cafe is an environment for all parents and families and staff to feel welcome and invited and encouraged to come into. So we want to make sure that it's not necessarily looking like a ladies' tea party, all pink and frilly and frou-frou, that fathers, male role models, male staff feel just as welcome as anyone else, and that they are invited to take part of that experience. Having music helps. It's just lends this invitation to come in. I have a playlist, I call it Happy Tunes. So when people are coming in, there are these jazzed up tunes, just feel good music that welcomes them into the cafe. During the cafe, I have softer music that's playing, just again, like if you were in a restaurant and there's background music playing, it's not loud enough to interrupt their conversation. It's just a backdrop. I had one program that really wanted to recreate an Italian restaurant. So they had had this amazing Italian feast that they had catered in. They had the tablecloths. It looked amazing. It felt like you were in an Italian restaurant as much as you could in their gym. And then they asked me, they're like, can you do a music playlist? So I did, I found all these Italian themed music, just like you're in an Italian restaurant. And it really helped, like I said, set that theme, tie everything together. It was very nice. I use things like Spotify, Amazon Music. There's lots of free resources for music where you can put together a playlist like that. So speaking of an Italian feast or whatever, if you feed them, they will come. So providing food, we at Curricula Concepts are really good about being on a shoestring budget and pinching that penny very tight. So, but we at least try to offer light meals and refreshments because we know that parents are more likely to attend or families are more likely to attend if, especially in the evening, if they don't have to go home afterwards and figure out what to do with hungry, tired children. If those kids have already been fed and they have already received a meal as well, they are more apt to attend the cafe. Same thing with childcare. If we can provide childcare, they're more apt to stay and not have to worry about what am I going to do with my children during the cafe. And I've done cafe with kids in the room with me. It's not the ideal. I'll make it work. But if I can have that time to have those parents really have that opportunity to focus and engage with other families, engage with the staff that are attending, that makes the cafe so much more meaningful when they have that opportunity to really just be there as themselves, be there as an adult and engage as an adult, rather than having their attention divided. Don't be discouraged if the first cafe doesn't get the response that you were hoping for. I have people, and we help them plan everything, get everything set up, promote it, all of these things, and then the turnout is not what they expected. And we've been training for a long time, so we know like you may have 20 people show up or sign up, you're not going to have 20 people show up. I can count on one hand the number of times that I've had that happen. It's always going to be less than what you expected, and that's okay. One of the cool things about cafes is they tend to be a very intimate setting. So a smaller cafe is still going to be a very meaningful and rich experience. So don't be disappointed. It takes time to grow and word will spread. I always tell programs, take that opportunity either right after the cafe or a few days after the cafe to talk to the families that did come, that did have a good time. Ask them a few questions. What did you enjoy the most? What are you going to take back? Like what was useful to you? What was the most meaningful to you? And then if you have a newsletter or put out a blast, put out something highlighting that cafe, share those things. Parents said, um, kind of like what Callisti shared earlier with those quotes, pulling that kind of information to get them to other parents that weren't there excited and interested and wanting to learn more about like, oh, I don't want to miss out on the next cafe. That sounded really interesting. How you market the cafe really matters. One of the most successful cafes I've ever done was with a group that promoted it as a parents' night out. They turned it into like this whole event, providing families an evening of grown-up conversation. They had this amazing baked potato bar. So, I mean, it was elaborate. It's like one of the most elaborate potato bars I've ever seen. So it was like baked potato and salad and soup, and just really, it's like, you put the kids in childcare, we're going to feed you, and we're going to have a cafe as entertainment. And they really pushed it like that. Like, this is an opportunity for you to talk to other parents. So how you market it matters. And like I said, after your first cafe, using those testimonials to tie it all together. And, especially if you have photographs and everyone looks like they're having a good time, the next cafe is going to be even bigger and they grow every time. We've seen that happen time and time again. Excuse me. The last consideration is the note to self, which Callisti talked about briefly, but I'm going to go into just a little bit more depth about it. So the note to self is at the very end of the cafe, and it's kind of like a little half sheet of paper with a prompt on it, usually encouraging them to make some kind, the participants to make some kind of commitment. But really, we tell them there's a prompt, absolutely. If that speaks to you, use it. But write down anything that you want to remember about the cafe. If you want to remember someone's name, if you're like me, I'm really great with faces, not as good with names. Write their name down, write a positive affirmation to your future self, because this is going to be mailed to you about 2 weeks to a month later. Whatever you want to remember about the cafe, write it down, because we tell participants, you're the only one that's going to see this. And so once they're done with that, they put it in an envelope and they give it to the facilitator to mail out, like I said, 2 weeks to a month later. The thing about that is, though, we don't really address envelopes to ourselves. So, and I also think writing letters is a lost art anyway, but just a gentle, friendly reminder to be sure that they put their address in the middle and not in the upper corner. Just helps them with that, because every cafe, I always have people write it where you normally would write your name and address. They forget, they're just on autopilot and they do it. But just a gentle reminder, put it in the middle. And then putting it in a brightly colored envelope, you think, well, why does that matter? It does. Participants tell me all the time, I was so excited to see that. I get these bright neon um, envelopes. I've also done it in pretty pastels too, but just something other than a white envelope if possible. And it just makes it seem a little bit more special. And they're like, I'm so excited. I knew it wasn't a bill. It looked like an invitation or a greeting card or something like that. I was really excited to get it and receive it. So those little details of all those things that we talked about, that lesson learned, those go a long way. I've seen as parents walk in, family members walk in, even staff walk in, and they see the place has been decorated. They hear the music playing, there's food, and their faces light up. Um, Seeing those little, like I said, seeing those little gift cards come in the mail, and people tell me I could retire if I had $1 for every time a participant has told me, I was so excited to get that. I'd completely forgotten about my note to self. And it was exactly what I needed to hear that day. I get chills just thinking about it, how many of them are like, I needed to hear that note to myself the day that I got that. So all of those things really do work together to make the cafes an enriching and memorable experience. So when we're talking about hosting cafes in other languages, there are 3 options that I've experienced 2 of them, and I've just recently heard of a third one that I'm going to share with you, that I can talk to you about some considerations, some pros and cons, and we're about to explore those in the next few slides. So if you have families that speak other languages, these are things that you might want to consider as you're planning a cafe in another language. So let's take a quick moment to look over those. So the first one is a combined group. And this is the one that I've probably done the most often. So we have both English and Spanish, participants or people who speak both English and Spanish participating in that cafe. The pro is everyone is there together. You at least get to see. I always think it's great to get to see who are the other children's parents that are playing with my children, who all are there, getting to see those faces and meet everybody. So everyone is there and able to attend regardless of what language you speak. So it helps build a connection, even if language is a barrier. And it also means just one cafe instead of having an English cafe and a Spanish cafe, one cafe. So if you're having it at evening, for example, it means one cafe, so you're not having to pay your staff to work over for 2 nights. So if that's a budgeting concern, one cafe might be the way to go. You also have to consider, like I said, the language barrier, and a translator may be needed. So even in situations where people may speak both English and Spanish, they're dual language or multi-language users, they may be more comfortable hearing it in their home language. In my experience, conducting a cafe like this, typically all of the participants who needed a translator have to sit at one table. So while everyone is there and there is an opportunity for a certain level of connection, there is also that if you need a translator, you need to sit here at this table, because while the translator may be up front with me as the trainer, at some point they're probably going to move to the table, or the people at the table will not be able to mingle in a cafe. So with a cafe, oftentimes when we have a question, as we switch through the questions, we encourage people to mix and mingle so they can meet other families, talk to other people, meet other staff. If you need a translator, you're not going to be able to do that because the translator is going to be there at that table translating it into English, and you won't be able to have those conversations at the other table. So just an additional consideration. Also, when I am with a translator as a trainer, I have to be very mindful about presenting my information in English in smaller chunks. I can't just rattle off everything. I have to remember to pause and give them an opportunity to relay what I've just said, and so they don't get lost in what I'm saying. So there's a very important turn-taking cadence between me talking and pausing, and then the translator relaying what I had to say, and then me talking and pausing, and then relaying it back to the translator, also taking questions as they come up and having that back and forth as well. So because of this back and forth between myself and the translator, while a cafe typically takes 90 minutes, you have to budget in extra time for this. It's going to take just a little bit longer with that back and forth. I usually encourage about 2 hours instead of just 90 minutes. People will be okay with it if you get out early, but if you say, oh, it's an hour and a half, and then it's really 2 hours, they're less okay with that. I'd rather give them time back than take time away. So just a consideration if this is the method that you use. The other thing is the translator may not be necessarily familiar with the subject matter, or they may not be a content expert on what I'm presenting. I've been very fortunate to work with programs that have had translators in-house. So they're familiar with the families, they're familiar with the programs, they're familiar with the early education landscape, but the specific content, they're not necessarily experts on. So working with them and meeting with them beforehand, and I'll talk some more about this when we talk about planning for a cafe, is very important. And it just takes some extra consideration and coordination between the trainer and the translator beforehand to make sure everything goes as smoothly as possible. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So the other option, or another option, is separate cafes. So you have an English cafe and a Spanish cafe. They're completely separate. So the pro is this builds unity for that specific group. So when I've done this for Spanish speaking families, it's great for them to get together to meet other families that speak their language. It's connecting for them. Obviously, the same thing's true for the English speaking participants. So it builds unity among those specific groups with that shared language. And even, we recognize that different regions or different countries may speak different dialects of Spanish. It does not impede or stop effective communication in any way. So it's really great for them to have that opportunity to get together and meet and connect. This does mean, however, that families speaking different languages are separate from each other. So we don't have that everyone is there together. There's two different cafes, and families that speak dual or multi languages must then decide which cafe do they want to attend. Or they're welcome to attend both, but they would have to decide which one, or both, that they'd want to attend. And it also means hosting multiple cafes. So cost and resource allocation would definitely have to be taken into account. Again, you're going to have to pay your staff for two different evening cafes, or do you have enough staff in the middle of the day to host a cafe while watching children if you're in a childcare facility? What community resources would be necessary to pull off two cafes? Excuse me. And then in addition to that, if you don't have a trainer that is fluent in Spanish and you have to bring in a translator, do you have funds allocated aside for that and for the cost of that? For cafes hosted in Spanish only, it's really important to partner up with a group or individual that has some level of experience working with families, preferably hosting cafe sessions, or maybe not necessarily cafes, but some experience doing something as a trainer with that skill set, or their content expertise to be the most effective. So again, like I said, I've worked with programs that have had translators in-house, so they're very familiar, at least with most of those, and have some, most people have some passing expertise and knowledge on the topics of the Better Together cafes, at least at some level. Because this may go beyond just typical translation services, because you're relaying information, you're conveying information And it's just a unique skill set. All right, and thank you. The last type that unfortunately the least familiar with, I've never done a simultaneous translation, but I'm very excited to. We've just recently found out about this technology and it sounds very interesting and something that I would love to utilize is simultaneous translation. So this is translation using a headphone system. So the people that are listening to the translation will have a headset. The translator, from what I understand, like I said, I've never seen this, I've never experienced it in person myself, but they have a device that fits over their mouth that blocks out the sound, but the people with the headphones can hear it. So it sounds really, really interesting to utilize. So some positives for this might be the opportunity, again, for all families to be together. You can host it in English and in Spanish. So you have a trainer speaking in English and a trainer speaking in Spanish, or a translator speaking in Spanish, who is familiar and conversant with the materials. Again, content expertise is very important. So it's going on at the same time. So everyone can be together and everyone's hearing it all at the same time. It might, however, be difficult to focus on what you're hearing in the headphones, because at the same time, you could still hear the English translation. You can hear the trainer speaking in English, talking at the same time you're hearing the Spanish translation, and that could be distracting, to say the least. The English speaker is also going to have to coordinate and stay synced with the Spanish speaking translator or trainer. Yeah, I've noticed when I've done trainings with a translator, I'll say something and then the trainer will, or the translator rather, will say something and I'm like, well, that took a lot longer to say than what I said. Or vice versa. I'll have said something and they say it really fast. I'm like, that was it. And they're like, yeah, that was it. So making sure that you're synced up and you're not 3 or 4 slides ahead or behind is very important. So there's a lot of coordination that would have to go on there to make sure that, again, you guys are doing that unified and in sync. There's still going to be a language barrier issue. Anyone that needs those headphones, they're going to have that headphones for the translation. It's going to be difficult again for them to mix and mingle during the cafe questions when participants are switching tables. They're probably going to have to stay at the same table. But again, I've never done it like this, so there may be some things that I'm not thinking about because I've never worked through that. But overall, each cafe is its own unique experience, and planning those cafes is critical. And without planning, oh, it's just not going to happen. So it makes every cafe its own memorable and positive experience. And I'd like to tell you a little bit how. If you've ever had the opportunity to attend a cafe or host a cafe, it's really easy to get caught up in the excitement of doing that cafe, of getting out there and reaching families and just, getting to that meat of the cafe, the main event of it. But planning it has to happen. It's a consider, people are like, oh no, we know how to do it. We've done it before. Every cafe is different. Every cafe needs planning. And I strongly encourage every time to have a planning meeting beforehand. It can be over the phone, it can be over Zoom. I know it's sometimes difficult to get everyone in the same location at the same time, but it's critical. And a key stakeholder that has to be at every planning meeting is the family. The family voice is crucial. If you want, if any demographic that you want at that cafe needs to be at the planning meeting in order for it to include all and be culturally responsive. So if you want fathers, if you want single parents, if you want grandparents, dual and multi-language speaking families, whoever it is, they need to be there at the table in that planning meeting. And that means you have to plan for the planning meeting to remove all obstacles and barriers that could be in their way, what might be preventing them from being able to attend. So if you want to host a planning meeting during the working day, is that going to keep families from coming because they're at work and they can't take off work? Or could it possibly be at lunch and they phone in or Zoom in to that meeting? Is it at evening? after hours? Do they have transportation to get there? Do they have the technology to get there? To be able to Zoom in, to be able to phone in? What, you know your families better than anybody. What barriers are stopping them in order to get them there? That's very critical. If there is going to be a translator that is there to help out at the cafe, they definitely need to be there as well, especially if they're not super familiar with the early education field. If they've never hosted or translated a cafe before, they need to be part of that planning meeting. It's very beneficial to have their perspective and to make sure that their needs are met. For example, I talked about talking and pausing. I have practiced with my translator. I'm like, we're just going to pretend like we're doing this. And I've read my part, and they've told me before, less, not that much, shorten it, until we got into a rhythm and a cadence, and I knew how much I could say with them without overwhelming them. This may necessitate additional meetings. I may have to meet with them a couple times to get that down. And I'm always certain that they have the materials in front of them as soon as possible. So they're able to review it and make sure that, because sometimes there's some jargon in there, or, specific content focused material or words or verbiage that they need to be sure that they're translating correctly. So I've had translators call me after they reviewed the material and ask questions. What does this word mean? Can you talk to me? Can you give me a definition? And talk through that with them and make sure that they are indeed translating it correctly. Also, if possible, a short debrief afterwards with the translator and with the program itself I found it to be very beneficial, making sure that the translator was comfortable, what can go better next time, what do I absolutely need to keep doing, those kinds of things. And it doesn't take very long. It's usually 10, 15, 20 minutes to have that with them about what went well, what didn't. Another important consideration is language versus culture. So like we talked about earlier, families may all speak Spanish, but their cultures may be very, very different based off of what regions or countries they're from. So again, having that voice at the planning meeting as much as possible is very important to make sure we are culturally responsive and respectful. I speak very little Spanish. I took 4 years in high school and I've forgotten a lot of it, but I do remember some of the basics. And when I can use words or phrases that I've learned when I'm speaking to Spanish participants, that goes a long way into making them feel comfortable. So a lot of times, I'll welcome them in, buenos dias, and don't laugh at my accent, but just using that little bit, and I'll see their faces light up. They're like, oh, when they thank me for coming, I'll say de nada. Yeah, I'll thank them for coming. Just that little bit goes a long way. So learning just a few simple phrases in Spanish or in whatever language that your family speak really helps to connect you with them. Finally, consider switching it up. A lot of times, as I'm typically the trainer and I have a translator, so I am the one that leads, and I lead with English because that is the language that I'm fluent in. But if you are blessed and have the opportunity of both an English and a Spanish trainer, or a trainer that speaks both English and Spanish fluently, lead with Spanish. Let that be the language that you start with, and then follow it up with English. A lot of times in our culture, English is the dominant language, but being able to hear the Spanish first is just kind of a fun way to mix that up. And again, is a very culturally responsive way to connect with participants. Finally, what resources are available to you? Do you have the option for multiple translators to be able to attend? I've only been able to do this one time. I've only experienced it one time, but we had multiple translators for not every participant, but we could match up a translator with like one or two participants, and they got to experience the cafe in one of the most authentic ways I've ever seen for a multi-language cafe. So the translator followed them around as they switched tables during the cafe portion. They got to sit there at the tables with them throughout the entire training. So nobody was, I hate to say stuck, but nobody was stuck at one table because they needed a translator. They had translators that were able to follow them around. And it really made a huge difference with how all the participants were able to connect to one another and communicate. But if you can't do that, a single translator might be a good option. Families may be able to point you into resources if you don't have someone on staff that is certified as a translator. And again, there is not one right way to do a cafe. Make it your own to fit the needs of your programs and families. I'm sure you guys can think of probably, like I said, half a dozen other ways to do a cafe, and it be a wonderful, successful, and engaging experience with your families. So thank you so much. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, I would love to talk to you if you're thinking about doing a cafe. Help, again, talk about lessons learned, what we've done, what's been successful for us. So please feel free to reach out to me. You can also follow us and see what we do on our social media pages. And with that, I'll turn it back to Callisti and Hannah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Deborah. You shared some really great considerations, both in the ways to some different options for hosting cafes in other languages, and also from the experiences of curricula concepts. So thank you so much for that. I did want to open the floor if anybody had any questions for Deborah about curricula concepts and the experiences that they have, or about the materials generally. I'll wait a moment if anybody wants to come off of mute and ask a question, or feel free to throw it in the chat.
Hi.
Hi, Laura, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Laura. I've asked questions like this many times in other ECE Zooms, but I wondered if anyone that has worked in the family cafe realm has ever done something like this at one of the baby cafes. There are a lot of Spanish speaking moms at one of the baby cafes that I work with, and they are always asking for information to take home to their families. A lot of them have 2 or 3 children at home in addition to the one that they're breastfeeding. And I just wondered if you feel like that this would work in that setting.
I am unfortunately not familiar with baby cafes.
Okay, no
I
worries.
just wanted to say, I think that it would be perfect, especially if the parents have children that are a bit older as well. I feel like all of the sessions would be relevant in different ways, as even as the infant is growing up. There's a lot of information in the cafes, that the Better Together family cafes, that they could use as their children are growing. So I think it would be a really great way to engage with folks that go to the baby cafes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and
I do know that
physical activity and screen time sessions, I think those would be really great as well. That would be relevant to any families.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And yeah, I was going to say, when one of our staff was helping write this, she had a partway through, I think it was infant and toddler. So a lot of, because she thought about it a lot as a parent. So yes, there's a lot of that focused in there as well. In fact, in the screen time one, the media plan, she wrote it based off of her own child. So who was
Right.
like I said, a toddler at the time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, no, I'm really trying to bridge the two, the baby cafes and the ECE education, and really try to implement them in a united way. I'm kind of working on that and trying to see what the parameters are on that with the grant. So this is really helpful and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and one other thought I had was a personal thought. Whenever I had my first child, I completely redid the way that I ate. I did a lot of research. I was looking for, how do I actually start my children on solid foods? What foods should I be serving to my kids. How should I be eating, especially as I was breastfeeding? Like, what did I need to eat in order for my body to be able to make breast milk and to be able to sustain my children? So I think there's so many different things, even with the nutrition sessions, that would be
Yeah.
good for moms too, because I completely changed my whole lifestyle,
Yes.
my whole eating habits, while I was pregnant and then after giving birth to my first child.
Me too. Same.
Yeah. I think there's something there about just completely needing to rethink about your life and how you're living it, whenever you
Yes.
have children.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There was one question that was submitted in the registration, and I was thinking about a response to that, but someone had asked the best ways to share this with providers, with childcare providers, so they'll actually look at the resources and use it. And so I was thinking, and Deborah, you probably have some ideas about this too, but I was thinking about this, and I think it would be helpful for a trainer or a coach that works with ECE programs, to work with them individually to help them plan and host the cafe. Maybe even the trainer or the coach could be the facilitator of the cafe, and the childcare program could just host it and invite the families to come, at least for thinking about offering the first cafe if they plan to do multiple ones. Maybe the childcare program could offer a family engagement activity, and then the trainer or the coach could lead the family cafe. And then another thing I thought about is information about the cafes can be shared during just a regular training or professional development opportunity that childcare providers go to, just for whatever professional development requirements that they have, as a way to support family engagement. I know that many of the trainings that we offer, we have a family engagement component, or a portion of the training where we talk about engaging with families and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that it could be a great way to share through just a regular training. Just plop it in there, share about it a little bit. And then a trainer could even set up a mock mini cafe during a family engagement training, um, to help providers sort of visualize what this would look like and how the family cafe would work if they did offer it on their own. And then you could give them a chance to practice it, during the actual training, so they could feel more confident and comfortable with hosting a family cafe.
One of the things that we have done that has worked out remarkably well, I should have added this to lessons learned. I didn't think about it until you said that. We'll oftentimes host a cafe just for a program's staff, so the staff are familiar with the process, and that is an amazing way to promote it because then the staff they've experienced it, they understand, because people are like, "What's a cafe?" And when staff are able to talk about it to families and say, "Oh, we got to experience it. It's going to be great. We're going to have dinner, and this is what it's going to be," rather than, I don't know, it's something the director something the director put together. Um, because staff really enjoy it. I mean, they've always just loved it, and then they're excited about it. They're excited to share it with families. So that's another way that's worked really well for us. Other than we offer it at conference sessions, so people get to experience what we call a cafe demo, and doing it that way and letting them kind of try it before we actually do it for their families. That's been very successful.
Right, fabulous. Well, I know we're getting to time. We appreciate the questions. Deborah, we appreciate all that you've shared. Before we close out, I just wanted to highlight the upcoming resource showcases. We have one on July 11th, highlighting Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative materials, and one on July 23rd, highlighting the new PALS micro trainings, that's the physical activity learning sessions. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to be able to register for those. And the recordings like this one will be on the Healthy Kids, Healthy Future website. We really appreciate you all for taking the time to join us today. And feel free, if you have any questions, to reach out to myself, Felicity, or Deborah. Thank you so much.